Hello and welcome to the Defiant Open Metaverse show. And it's a very special one today because we're welcoming Jessie Dickson-Lopez,
Hello.
the writer, the brains behind MV3. And I'm not really sure how best to describe this. So I'm going to let you do that, Jessie.
Okay.
Why don't you give us a kind of heads up on who you are and the project that you have launched into the world of Web3?
I'd be happy to. First of all, to anybody watching either live or later, I apologize about my incredibly cinematic light. It's quite early here in LA. I'm Jessie. I am a television writer and a screenwriter and a showrunner. I have worked in Hollywood for over a decade now and cut my teeth in the Stranger Things writing room, which I worked on for the first few seasons. I've worked on Narcos. I worked on this criminally underrated show called The Outsider, based on a Stephen King novel for HBO. And I have been under an overall deal with MRC for the last 4 years, working on one show called Lucia that I co-created with Damien Chazelle, which is now greenlit and will be going into production early next year. And since then, I have also been obsessed with this project called MV3. I got into Web3 because of my brother, who is my co-founder, who's unfortunately not here today. And the second that I started discovering NFTs, I just got it. You know, there's in Hollywood, I think like one of the most difficult things is breaking in, of course. But then once you've broken in, there's this whole system around you and like you're never really quite empowered. And I just saw another way forward with Web3. And so we've been building MV3, which is a story that I've created. It's a sci-fi, you can call it dystopian. I have mixed feelings on the word dystopia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like I'm like, is it just truth, right? Like I'm like, especially now in 2022, can we call anything a dystopia? Or is it just a reality?
Well, I think you can say there's a pessimistic view of humankind's inability to plan for their own future. And that's the dystopian version of it, and the utopian version of it is the Star Trek version, and that's given life on screen where there's no money and we go out and search brave new worlds. So the utopian version does exist, but the dystopian version obviously sits opposite that. And of course, dark characters are much more interesting and layered and nuanced than just kind of one-dimensional positive. It's the basic Superman versus Batman is how I always look at it. So yes, I think dystopian is okay.
Yeah, it's I for sure. All those things are very, very true. And I think I question the term dystopian probably to feel better about the reality that we live in today, which is like very clearly a dystopia by those terminologies. All to say, yeah. So I created a story called MV3, The Battle for Luna City, and we created it as an NFT project. So,
but here's the thing. There's an Instagram account.
There's an Instagram account.
This Instagram account has 1.3 million followers.
Yeah.
It has 603 posts. Somebody in your team really understands Instagram and understood how to start the process of bedding in an audience on Instagram. This is astonishing.
I wish he was on the stream with me. I agree with you. He's the person who brought me into it, and I was so in awe with what he did. My brother has always been on the cutting edge of technology where I haven't been. I was like the geek behind books my entire life. And he's built like tons of Instagram pages and sold them. And he got really like obsessed with NFTs and Web3 probably a year and a half ago. And I didn't pay attention at first. And then one day he just sort of sent me the link to, yeah, exactly, his Metaverse page. I think at the time it had like maybe 20,000 followers and it just exploded. He is so, he's so dedicated to it. His point has been educational. I've been so lucky to be so close to him because I got a really good education on NFTs and Web3. I didn't come in through scams. I like have quite an idealistic view on what we could look like and what this tech could look like. And I think it's all because of Roberto. And he's done an incredible job just onboarding people onto the space responsibly. And it's a passion project for him. So yeah, pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, well, pretty fucking cool is the fact that you took this sidestep into Web3 because, I mean, you didn't need to be honest with you. It's hard enough breaking into TV. It's hard enough breaking into the insane kind of just it's such a weird thing trying to explain to people what breaking into being a writer in Hollywood actually is like.
Yeah, it takes
I've tried and I failed, but I didn't try because I recognized early on that actually probably I should stay as a director, and I started writing because I wanted to learn the craft of writing, and it's very you learn very quickly just how little people appreciate it and just how difficult it is as well. And I'd much rather work with great writers than try and write myself, because it just doesn't work. But what was your journey, and where did you struggle, and what was the big break for you in all of that?
I always, I think, I've always wanted to be a writer. It's just one of those lame true things. I grew up with a book in my hand, and then as I got older, I got really obsessed with horror films in general. So I grew up making horror films and making all my siblings and friends star in them, and did that whole thing. Eventually, I went to Columbia University. At that point, I was, sort of a modern day beatnik, and thought I was going to write poetry and short stories and novellas that nobody would read for a living. And I went to go see a talk at our school with Bo Willimon, who at the time had just created House of Cards. And he was like, for all of you writers out there who think you're too good for television, you should see what I'm doing. It's the most fun I've ever had. It's like the most, and so I just instantly pivoted. And I started writing television scripts. I moved to Los Angeles, and I did the traditional path. I worked as an assistant at an agency for 5 months. I hustled like crazy, and I got a job working for my boss at the time, represented the creator of Breaking Bad, Vince Gilligan. And when one of his writers got a show picked up, Moira Wally Beckett, I'd gotten to know her, so she hired me as her assistant. And from there on, I wrote a script. All I did was write during production, and she asked to read one of my scripts and offered me a job in her writing room. And then the show got canceled. But from there, I had people started reading one of the scripts that I passed around called Home. And it was one of those things that you just don't think really happens. It's like within 24 hours, every major agency in Hollywood was calling me, being like, we want to meet you, we want to meet you, we want to meet you. And it moved really quickly from there. I got my first job on a show called The Returned, which got canceled before my season aired, because this is
but they all get canceled eventually.
They all get canceled. I can't tell you how many things that I've worked on that have just never seen the light of day.
Oh God, it's gutting. Yeah.
It's like gutting, and also you just get used to it. And then I had a bunch of offers, and the first thing I chose was this little script called Montauk with these two guys called the Duffer Brothers, who, we just vibed. And then that I took a job on that show, and that ended up becoming Stranger Things, which was this massive phenomenon. And it really kickstarted my career from there.
So I'm guessing this is 2012, 2013, something like that.
2013 is when I graduated from college. So Stranger Things would have come probably 2015, 16, I'm guessing. I'm so bad at numbers and math.
Well, it's this rise of Netflix narrative, isn't it? Because House of Cards really validated Netflix as a major source of original content and completely changed the game. Changed the game on streaming, and of course you have David Fincher directing and being a huge part of that. Kevin Spacey, it's changed now, but Kevin Spacey was a huge deal in that Netflix.
100%. It was also
Netflix equation. So
good.
But the Duffer Brothers came out of nowhere. Seemingly.
Yeah. It was. People were very confused. I think at that time, Netflix was still doing the thing where they were attaching very, very big names to all of their shows that they were doing, and Stranger Things was tiny. They're like, Winona Ryder wasn't even attached. It was kind of crazy that they got the show greenlit based on a really good script. And not only that, but they were allowed to direct, right? And so they knew what they were doing, right? It's
well, they had a vision for it, and some of the weirdest things that came on Netflix. I think it shows like the OA. Like, who else would have made the OA? I was so bonkers. and beautiful and weird. I loved that show, but it was weird. But beautifully weird.
Yeah.
So you must have been binge listening script notes like the voices of Craig Mazin and John August, like just
Honestly,
on repeat.
I know so many people do, and I'm not an audio learner. I've actually I never listened to podcasts. I'm weirdly somebody who doesn't listen to a lot of music. So no, I sometimes I followed him on Twitter, John August, but I just had my own kind of weird path. A lot of my references were like old Hollywood films, and I'm a big reader, a lot of books. So I think my approach is slightly different than a lot of television writers.
Which is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
You probably didn't go down the save the cat route as well.
Yeah. No.
Miss out on that.
The way that I write is very different than most television writers that I write. And it's funny because I'm running a writer's room right now, and it's the most non-traditional writer's room ever because I don't write in a traditional way, right? There's the writers I work with are so smart and incredible and intelligent, and both of them are playwrights first who have moved into Hollywood. And so we found a really fun way to write. But yeah, I'm not the person who beats out card by card in any way. I'm very much somebody who creates my characters, creates the world, and then I put so much trust in my characters and kind of let them show me the way and guide them. So it's a different kind of process. And I think that comes from being, wanting to be a novelist first and figuring, rather than trying to learn somebody else's process, I just kind of adapted my own.
That's interesting because I think a lot of TV writers, particularly probably from early 2000s on, were just so grooved in that 4-act structure. Here's the ad break, here's the ad break, here's the ad break, here's the cold open, and all these things that it's just such a formula. You can feel it in your blood. And it's when I guess we saw more non-traditional formats come up, you can go beyond an hour, you can be 46 minutes, or you can be 110 minutes. It doesn't matter really. Just what's the story? The thing started to break apart a little bit, and the ad break wasn't there. I think a lot of people think Netflix shows are too slow as well, but for me, that's the great joy of it. I know you're working on a show for Apple, and one of the best things I saw this year was Severance on Apple, which is just mind-blowingly good. I thought it was fantastic, but a lot of people said it's way too slow. It's way too slow. Where do you sit on all of that? Do you have a rhythm that's kind of determined by act breaks, or do you just allow the story episode by episode?
I don't really write to act breaks, but I do, I'm very mindful of pacing. I like to have a quicker pace just in general. And it's funny because my show that I'm working on right now for Apple is basically the story of a life, from birth to death. It's it seems like an indie film. If I pitched it, it would seem to you like this tiny indie film. It's kind of crazy actually that Apple's letting us make it, but they take risks, which is really cool. But I think because of the way that I write, it moves pretty quickly. That's always just been a pace that I'm comfortable with. The Outsider was probably the slowest thing that I worked on, because both Stranger Things and Narcos, we had a pretty fast pace. Stranger Things, we have a breakneck pace, really. And I think it's one of the reasons that show does so well, or in the first few seasons that I worked on it, at least, is one of the things that I learned a lot from the Duffers is pacing. They're masters at it. They really sort of know how to keep the page moving. And I love and appreciate all slow film, but I think there is working in television, I think I'm just I need to make sure the audience is watching, right? And so even if I'm not writing towards act breaks, I think I've learned a natural rhythm where, you're always going, okay, where's this character at? Where's this character at? What does the audience care about in this moment? How do I make sure that they're paying attention? Am I losing them? And it seems like I'm thinking all the time, but it becomes quite a natural process. And so we'll see. But yeah.
So a lot of people in Web3 use the word story and talk about narrative, and it always makes me laugh because I think I think most people think in terms of cinematic language and television and that kind of thing, and they think they're an expert because they watch and consume so much of it, but I don't think you can really understand how those mechanics work on people until you've written it yourself. So it's always funny for me when I hear people talking about, well, it's all about the story. My first instinct is, who's the showrunner? But in this instance, well, that's you, and you are in fact a showrunner. You are the real deal. You know this thing. You know how to pace a season of content and understand that. So
it's one of the reasons that I did this, actually. When I came into the space like a total degen. My entire life I've been really fiscally responsible. I've never played with DeFi. I'm the most responsible investor. I'm not a risk taker. And something like cracked in my head when I discovered NFTs, and I just like minted like a monster. I was, I like started trading. I never did any of these things. I got so obsessed, but I kept coming.
When was this though? What point in the cycle was this?
Like it was October 2022 is when I.
Oh, it's late. So late. Well, you know that October 22 is actually in the future.
Oh, sorry, October 2021. Like I said, I'm really bad at numbers. Like my brain works in strange ways. So yeah, 2021. Is that still late or am I early?
That's pretty late. Yeah. So I started reporting on NFTs mid 2020. Like around about then. But that's still quite late. CryptoKitties 2017, you know, that was when the first idea of it, and then it just sort of got forgotten about. It was this, you know, here today, gone tomorrow. And then this weird movement of fine art into NFTs grew up, and that got really interesting, but mainly because there were some big sales, and the big sales started to kind of shine a light on what was going on here. And then things got really mad through the first half of 2021. So yeah, so that's reasonably late into the hype cycle, I think, of all of this. But I'm curious, like, how do you find time for all this? Because being a writer it's pretty like full on, really.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's hard. Like I feel, you know, like last night, my poor husband, who was also one of our partners in MV3, I had, you know, I'm like constantly having meltdowns, right? It's because I'm like, my schedule is insane. It's just the truth. There's no breathing room in my schedule. And I think one of the things that has been difficult lately is what gets sacrificed in it all is my kid, like that. And so that's tricky, but you just do what you got to do. I'm so passionate about both things. And yeah, you make the time. I think, isn't that like what happens when you become a parent though? All of a sudden you have a 10th of the time that you used to have, and you just figure it out. I try not to think about it. I just do it.
Yeah, I've said this to a number of young parents recently, because I'm a lot older than I look, and they go, "Well, yeah, you know, when you have kids," I'm like, "No, I have two kids. They're 8 and 10. I've been through this, and like you're right. You realize that you have far less time than you ever thought you had, but somehow you're able to get it all done nonetheless, and still carve out like an hour and a half in the evening to go and sit in front of the TV and watch something before collapsing into bed. Nobody understands that. You just get really efficient at doing stuff, and particularly, and the thing I also wanted to dig into is the writer has the biggest challenge of anybody, which is you have to create something that doesn't exist. Yeah. You have to put your pen on the paper, and it's also one of those skills that everybody knows how to write. We all get taught how to write the language of our birth, and yet coming up with a story is so vulnerable and fragile, and putting your work out there for other people to criticize is deeply difficult. And yet this is the job that you've decided to do for a living. So how does that all work out? You know, how do you deal with white page tyranny?
I've been doing it for a while now, and I'm busy. And so when you're busy, you don't have enough time to second guess yourself. Like a few years ago, before I had my son, before I was running a show, I had nothing to do but second guess myself. It would take me so much longer to get anything done. And now, I trust myself a great deal, and that's something new for me. I probably in the last couple of years, I got to that place where I'm like, enough people in my life, you know, have been telling me that I know what I'm doing. And I was the last person to agree. And now, and so I take, you know, comfort in that there is like the spiritual part of me is like, there's something here that knows what I'm doing, even if my mind doesn't feel like it is. I somehow pull off, right? I don't know. It's like the magical, mystical part of writing that I will never understand. Sometimes it feels like it's not quite me. But yeah, I mean, it's terrifying. It's I failed a lot. I've fallen on my ass so much, right? It's like my journey seems quite simple, but it hasn't always been. And so that's part of it is like, I think I just assume everything I do is going to fail. And so I hustle and I fight so fucking hard to make sure that it doesn't. Like, it's like, in a way it comes out of fear, and then it's fear and trust. It's a weird combination of it, but yeah, it is hard. And Yeah, I think it's like, get busy. The times I've written my best scripts have been when I've been too busy to think about it and to think
Yeah,
about
absolutely. You have this sort of lizard brain that kicks in that just says, this is right. And even
Yeah,
if it isn't right, you'll make it work. And it's that I know how to edit my own material. I know how to
yeah,
transform my own material. I also know how to pitch my own material. And it's that's the bit that is probably the hardest for anyone to really wrap their heads around. Like once you have something in your hand, if you're a writer, at some point you've got to go and pitch it to an
yeah.
exec, to a manager, to an agent, and
Mhm.
convince them in probably less than 8 minutes if you're doing it kind of the modern way, which is over Zoom calls. Like you got to pitch them and get that all condensed, everything that you, all your love and effort that you put into something, across to them in a very short space of time. And that pitching process is so humbling, and it teaches you so much as well about
Yeah.
the validity of your ideas. And it's pretty heartbreaking at times, but once you've been through that sort of baptism of fire, I think you come out pretty strong afterwards.
Yeah. Again, I found my own weird process for pitching. I'm not like a natural public speaker by any means. Like pitching was not something that I ever, well, like the first time I realized I was going to have to do it, I was like, what are you, no, like
No,
I'm a writer. This isn't how I work of it.
it
And so
sucks.
it doesn't make any sense. And so I
Yeah.
make sure, like I will write a 1 to 2 pager, and I make sure when I pitch that that's been read in advance, so that I can sort of like relax a bit and know that the like strongest information is getting across. But yeah, it's really tricky. It's a really tricky process. I've cried in pitches before. It's like you like the moments where you're really connected. It's like going on a first date, right? You either connect with somebody and you're like, oh, they're feeling me, I'm feeling them, this is going awesome. Or you're sitting in front of a network and you're like, this person has zero interest in me. What am I doing here? Just get me out. Get me out. Right?
It's rough. It's rough. So my journey was, because I was in the UK, I do Zoom pitches, and like you had to pay for these as well. So it was like $20 a pop, and you had 8 minutes,
You
and
have
like
to
you
pay.
just had to get on it and go, yeah, because like I had no idea what I was doing, and I couldn't afford to go out to LA, so I would pitch over the phone on a Zoom call, and it was brutal, but it taught me so much, and I got really good at it. But like
Yeah.
often, because Zoom is so sketchy, it would just stop, and like you have no idea if the person can still hear you or not. You just keep going, and then after like 7 minutes, you're like, do you have any questions? And you've got a timer in front of you, you've got your notes in front of you. The whole thing
What?
is just like, yeah, no, this is crazy. I did like 40 or 50 of these,
Okay,
and
I've never done anything like that. That sounds so intense.
it taught me so much, and it taught me that my writing sucked, because
No.
I would be very good at the pitch, and then I would send them the sample. They'd be like, "Yeah, that's a pass." So it's like I got tons of interest, and I realized that what I'm really good at is persuading people on the validity of my ideas, which is a director's job, really. That's
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's what directors should be doing. And I at the moment we're setting up the studio here to have a writer's room, to have that
Oh,
same kind of structure where we sit around and we chew through ideas and we really bash things out properly, and we set structure in place. But that's only because I've just spent so long in total admiration of writers' rooms, how they function, how they operate, and how they're able to take what is a seemingly simple skill and elevate it, as we have now, to this arena of TV that is like so multifaceted and so fascinating, and producing seemingly every day a new show that is just blowing my mind. I'm like, we all look back and be shocked at how good things were right now. It's crazy.
yeah, I love hearing that like rosy colored vision of the industry, because I think often from where I'm standing, I'm like, how is there so much that just is not good, right? Like it's like you
Yeah.
get like there's for every Severance, there's like 17 shows on Netflix that, you're like, wow, you spent how much money on that when you could, I mean, not to hate on
Oh,
it.
the worst one I had is, it's my friend Swanee, who often on the show with me. He's an actor. He broke into Hollywood, and he got cast on the Amazon pilot for The Dark Tower, Glenn Mazzara.
Oh yeah.
And like
That
they
was,
worked for 3-4 years on. Sorry,
yeah,
that
that was,
one.
yeah.
And they shot the whole pilot, and he said it was incredible. He said that the thing was amazing. Nobody will ever see it. I don't know how much they spent on it, but it's 50-60 million just
I'm sure it was very expensive.
gone.
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah,
why does it go down the toilet like that? It's so sad. So many people, so much great effort, and like I know Glenn bled for that show, but like,
yeah.
yeah,
It was the studio that I'm under a deal under MRC. It was an MRC show as well, and so Glenn was also under a deal at my same studio, and it was right around the time that I had first signed with them. And I remember when all that went down, it was, I think, really heartbreaking and surprising. But that's this industry. Like the first show I developed was, we sold it to a network instantly. Like I was in the room with the head of the network, who was like, this is brilliant, like couldn't have been more complimentary. He was like, we're opening a writer's room. I was like, oh, I think I was like 29 at the time. Maybe, I don't know, maybe younger. And I was like, oh, I've made it. Like I have made it. And then, slowly I just watched all of those promises and stuff just die away. And I was like, oh, this is never going to air. Like this has been and that's the story way more often than it isn't.
So I guess that's why you are doing these things in parallel, because working with Damien Chazelle, the writer of Whiplash, Oscar nominated, Oscar winning director, writer, just all around good guy, genius. You're writing with him for Apple.
Yeah.
You don't say no to that.
No.
You don't say no to that.
No, not at all. I was, I mean, again, he and I have been working together for 4 years now. It's been such a long journey. And that just goes to show, even when you have Damien Chazelle, it's hard to get something made. We have like arguably one of the hottest directors, and it took 4 years to get our yes.
Well, I guess it's probably quite a specific project as well, because his projects tend to be quite, there's a specific vision attached to them. It's not easy fodder, probably.
No. I mean, I think it's going to be very watchable, but yeah, no, it is. It's very specific. The first episode is like half in Spanish, half in English, and
perfect.
Yeah, I think it's going to be. I mean, I think it'll be special, and Damien is, like you said, he's brilliant, so it'll be cool. But yeah, and then I have a couple other things coming up in the television world, but creating an NFT project was not in my cards at all. Like when we started talking about it, was more. When I became addicted to Web3, I think I reached out to my agents and I was like, I'm addicted to Web3. How do I do this? And they were like, let's put you in contact with our digital assets team, who are lovely. And
who is your agency, by the way, just out of interest?
I'm at UTA. I was at CAA for a long time, and I have been at UTA happily for a while.
Interesting, because CAA are the ones who are making the biggest noise about Web3. I've not heard anything from UTA. Which I thought was strange.
Yeah, no, they have a really cool they have a really cool system led by Leslie Silverman. It's definitely quieter. CAA does everything loudly. No hate on CAA at all. Like I said, that was my first agency, and they're loud and they make splashes and they represent a lot of shiny people, and yeah, and I think UTA is building differently, and they represent some cool people and some cool projects, and they've been so insanely supportive of what we're doing here, which has been really cool. But yeah, so basically, I realized I wanted to create in Web3 just because I was like, what an awesome opportunity. Like and since you worked in television, one of the things that people are always telling you is no fan service. Do not write to your fans. That's the first way that you ruin a show. You've got to stay like agnostic, whatever. And Stranger Things, I mean, yes, that was definitely a part of it. But what I learned from that show is how much your fans actually benefit a project. Like you don't exist if you don't have fans. And fans are such a strange word to use in Web3, but I was instantly like, oh, I can do this. I can write a story. I don't know. I mean, there's projects that are doing it, I guess, who created NFT projects and now they're building stories out of them. I wouldn't know how to do that. It was very confusing to me. I was like, if somebody came to me with, whatever, some ape derivative project, and they were like, can you come up with a story and a world out of this? I would say no, right? Like, and so we worked backwards and I created a world and a story. And I was like, now we can make this an NFT project. And my brother at the same time, I actually didn't know that he wanted to start his own project. He was like pretty focused on the metaverse. And I called him one day and I was like, yeah, I just spoke to my agents about like writing an NFT project. And he was like, wait, I've been wanting to do that. And so it just worked out. Yeah, it was really fun. Neither of us knew that like the other person was interested in actually creating their own thing. But
you said you got addicted to Web3. What was it that was the addiction part?
A lot of it was the Metaverse community. I made so many friends. It's like, I don't know if you feel this way, but you know, I'm a mom and a woman in my 30s. I run shows. Every single person in my life seems like the same wonderful person over and over and over again. Like all of my friends work in Hollywood. We're all around, you know, in the same decade, and we have similar experiences, and we talk about our shows and our kids. And like, there's something really addicting about being able to come into the Metaverse Discord and be hanging out with all these people who like would never probably pay any attention or like give a shit about my life or my experience otherwise, because they're like 20-year-old college kids or whatever all over the world, and just leveling with each other. And that I think was really addicting. I like the shit posters and NFT chat were really addicting. It was so funny and so much fun. And I've always been like kind of a secret gamer. And so that was all part of it. And then minting NFTs and trading NFTs. It was like, I mean, it is like gambling, right? Like it's the highs and the lows are so intense. And I fell really, really hard. And I also think I tend to be a really responsible person. And so our approach to building our collection is responsible. And I'm also like, oh, I think I'm like a very non-Web3 founder, if that makes sense.
Well, no, not really, because I don't think anybody is a typical Web3 founder. So I'm curious what you think the typical Web3 founder is that you can be atypical.
I think the typical Web3, okay, I don't want to say the typical Web3 founder, maybe the typical Web3 project lives on hype, right? Like there's like these like sort of cycles of hype that you're constantly following. And I'm like, I don't know, that's not how my brain works. Like in order to have been successful in my career, I had to be a really good writer. Like the product has to be really strong. I'm always like the way that you spoke, where you were like, I have a really good pitcher, but then they'd read my script. I was the opposite, right? I'm like, just let them read the thing. Let them like, please, like, let me just do the thing that I know I do really well, right? And I've always been quality first. And so with MV3, you know, like one of the things that I am curious about the Web3 space is it's so small and it's so insular. And even like the top hottest projects in the space, they're not like recognized by the mainstream in any way. And I would argue that a lot of them will have trouble translating over to the mainstream. And so my goal is to break through. And that's all we've been talking about with MV3. We're like, yes, it comes from an NFT collection. And that's so important because we'll always be able to give the highest level of access to our holders, not only the highest level of access, but, you know, we're hoping, again, and not financial advice because we're still working on this with our legal team. We'd love to share revenues back from our licensing fees and all the, you know, I think the goal is like, how do we take the power out of major studios' hands and major corporations' hands and put it into the hands of our holders and our fans? And I actually think you would be quite interested in it. You know, it's like one of the things that you were saying about like the pitching and having to pay $20 to pitch for 8 minutes. Another thing that I'm doing with MV3 is I'm onboarding a lot of artists. And I'm like, let me help you and let me take my team of people and help you. And I'm like, maybe in my weird idealistic way, this is also a way to help people break into storytelling from who otherwise wouldn't be seen or acknowledged or have a chance. Because I recognize how lucky I am just to have been seen. Like I could move to LA and work at an agency, and not everybody gets those kind of opportunities.
Yeah, you can see some wrongs that you can potentially right.
Yeah,
literally right through your own kind of reimagined version of the studio system, because that's effectively what you're creating here in Web3. And I think there are people starting to see more and more of what this is. I know there's people from Amazon, from Netflix, from major Hollywood outfits that have left positions to set up camp here.
Yeah.
And you do wonder, are you just going to replicate what you already know in this space and therefore accelerate towards failure? Because we don't need a replica of what we already had. What we need is is a fresh new thing, and that is necessarily open-ended, and that's necessarily vulnerable and can fail. But if you're okay with that, then that's fine.
I mean, I have to be okay with failing. Otherwise I wouldn't be a writer. Like, I would have picked it up.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I'm so comfortable with that idea. I honestly, I thought I was going to be broke my entire life. And like, I was like committed. I'm like, this is what I do. I have things in my brain that I make. But it's interesting. It's like, I see Hollywood try and enter the space over and over and over again. And the Web3 space is not kind. Like, it's not kind. Like, they're like, you're trying to take advantage of our space. You are, this is a cash grab. And so they're having a hard time breaking through. I think one of the things that I benefit from deeply is my understanding of the space, is the fact that, my brother is a crypto native and a Web3 native, and I feel really protective of the space, and really, I'm like, no way do I want to just grab money from our community. Like, I said it very clearly from the beginning. I'm not here to make money at all. Like, that's not, I have my career. It's totally fine. I'm here because I just like see a way in. And it's been really exciting to say, okay, like, our collection just sold out. We revealed next week. And I've made so many strong relationships already with our holders. And I'm like, oh, wow, how fucking awesome will it be if all of these plans that we have, and we have a lot that are in motion already, that'll not necessarily be the film, but all the steps in between. We just keep building. We keep building the brand, really, the MV3 brand, and finding new ways to connect our story to other people. And I think it will connect with people. And then, all of a sudden, our holders were there from the beginning and will profit and benefit from all of it. So I just think it's a really beautiful way of building. And I believe in it, and I'm really committed to it. And yeah, I think it's just the trick for me and our team is finding me more time to write. Again, that's the tricky thing about being the founder in a business, and like a business owner, but also the writer, is these days it's tricky. It's tricky to find that time.
But also it's tricky in Web3 when everyone is deeply entitled and they want the next airdrop and they want the next piece of pampable or tradable information from you.
Already happening, and it blows my mind. I'm like, we sold out, I think, on Monday, just a few days ago, and like, I'll sometimes go into our holder chat, and people are like, what airdrop, right? Like, they're like, what is the next big announcement? What is? And I'm like, oh, well, I have to take a second. But also, there's so many people who see our vision, and I think I've pretty clearly stated that this is long term. And so again, the benefit of having my brother and I is that he has his eye pretty clearly on Web3 strategy, whereas after reveal, I'm going to be focusing more on Web2 strategy. We're planning on opening our own writers' room for MV3 that's going to have all different kinds of writers, not just film and TV. And, really sort of breaking it out. We have, I think, none of this has been announced yet because the deal hasn't quite closed yet, but we have a lot of really cool ways to onboard Web2 into the world, because we're just trying to reach other audiences. And, my thesis is always, the bigger your brand, the more important your brand is. It's just going to benefit your holders. So that's kind of like what's next up on my agenda, is like, how do I reach as many people as I can with MV3? How do I get, Cosima and Eli to become familiar names, and Luna City to be a place where people want to spend time and get to know these characters?
Well, let's get into that. We're gonna wind up the voiceover voice. 2081, Luna City, a society simmering with rage, locked down by curfews and strict regulation. A place where humans and androids rub shoulders, where hate is as palpable as love, where every hero has become a villain in their quest for revolution. In war, there are no winners, but there are champions. So that's me.
You're hired. I was like, what is this?
What is this? Well, so you may be aware of a project called Cyberbrokers. I literally, I read their lore live on the show when I had them on, and they hired me immediately to read their lore for their podcast. And it's what I do, right? Like, I have an English accent, and I can speak. I can read text off a screen live.
I actually think you would do a great Eli. You would be a great Eli Truss. No, that's so funny.
I told you, my pitching is on point. It's on point. So listen, so Aluna City is the sandbox world in which your entire kind of story world takes place. But there's characters within that world, and you must have kind of key characters, but also a whole zoo of other characters that exist around that world. Give me an overview of who's there and who's important, who we should look out for.
Sure. God, I'm just being blasted by sun right now. I wish I.
Yeah, had... no. What you need is you need a hazer, basically. You need to just pump a bunch of like smoke and haze in there, and you'll just look fantastic. Oh, so we'll call up Ari and just get them to send something over.
This was not well planned. I think I woke up and had to get my child breakfast. I was like, right, this thing.
I know. We need a bit of like soft diffusion in front of there. I'm so sorry.
No, oh my God, why are you sorry? And I'm not gonna say it. But yeah, so our story really revolves around Cosima Trust and her father Eli. I started with this relationship as the thing that I saw most clearly in my mind when I started building Aluna. And Eli Trust is, he's Julius Caesar. He's like, you can call him Steve Jobs meets Elon Musk. He's a technology idealist and enthusiast who created the Trust Corporation. And this is where it starts to feel a bit cyberpunk. And he created a brand of androids that have become really powerful, and the artificial intelligence has now possibly gone sentient in a really beautiful way. And then it centers around his daughter, Cosima Trust. She's, I would call, our true hero. Cosima was born, obviously, incredibly privileged because of what her father did. She grew up quite nerdy in the laboratory with her father and watched the emergence of artificial intelligence. She really grew up among these androids. And because of it, she had a different relationship with them. And so in this way, it's very much a good versus evil, although I don't know if I believe anybody is ever quite evil, Star Wars story, and where her father, very much believes that artificial intelligence robots, bots as they call them, are dangerous and they should be owned by humans. And she believes that androids should be liberated. And so there's a movement that builds around that. And then there's a really fun cast of characters around Cosima called the Collective. There are like Amblin-esque ragtag gang. There is the Wiz. The Wiz is Eli's former business partner, but he's a bit of a like drunken Hispanic man who, ended up having a giant rift with Eli. Originally, I sort of based him off Steve Wozniak, and then he just evolved into his own hilarious, weird creature. And so he joins the Collective and works with Cosima, and he knows the AI so intimately because he created them, right? And then you have Malik, who is an android, and she's Cosima's partner. He's Cosima's partner, and he's quite a soulful. He's the Romeo of our story. Actually, even he's more Hamlet than Romeo. He's quite tortured with his own existence in the same way that Hamlet is. And Sutra, all of my references have been Shakespearean, funnily enough, with this story. And then there's Sutra. Sutra I based originally off Frankenstein. Just this idea of somebody who was created, who now has life, who was created in a way where they look so monstrous to society and being forced to be in that body and in the natural rage that occurs. And so we have the Collective, and they're just this ragtag gang who are trying to fight the good fight. And in a lot of ways, as I entered the space, Web3 is so rebellious in nature. We're all just trying to topple the existing systems and figure out something new and something more equitable and fair. And so I mimic a lot of that in the story where, there's, a group of young rebellions in the Wiz who are trying to topple the power structures in the world that they live in and basically take their world back. And so it's it's fun and adventurous and pretty dark. A battle breaks out. And I think that a lot of that has been based on just the American political system over the last few years. Things are quite divisive. And so the way that I work is I just push things. And I think it'll be a lot of fun.
So how can people get involved in this? Where will the story play out? Because I'm assuming it's not just going to be a TV show. There's going to be all sorts of different ways that this can play out.
Yeah, it's going to play out in a ton of different ways for people who are interested in Web3, or think they want to be early adopters of MV3, that, stay on our website, stay on our Twitter. All of the story will always drop there first and foremost. The first iteration of it will be an audio experience. And then from there on, once this is sort of planned, I'm already in development of the film. But we start with gaming. That's not necessarily Web3 games at all. And comic development. And, I think like my goal with all of this is just to hit every single medium of art. And I won't do it on my own. I'm going to, work with the best of the best and say, hey, here's these characters in this world I created. Can you help me build it into something else? Like, can we reach a new audience this way? And, it's like the spider effect.
Seems like a lot. It seems like a lot. You talked about the film. I mean, like, this is home base for you. So I know that you're in that system. You probably, know how to craft a story. But is there a danger in trying to do too much too quickly? And also, I guess, is there a danger that by bolting these very familiar old world formats onto this, you're restricting the potential for it to be something completely different? And I guess what I'm asking is there room for a Metaverse project to just be its own thing? And it doesn't have to be a film, it doesn't have to be a game, it can just exist as this sort of transmedia world. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that, but I'm curious what your take on it is.
Yeah, I think there is. And I think that's like partially what we're hoping to do, is by creating it as an NFT project. I mean, I could have just gone and pitched it to a film studio and sold it, right? And been in development for the next however many years, and maybe it'll get made and maybe it wouldn't. But I think there's absolutely, we're going to have to do that, right? Like it's the point isn't that we're making a movie. The point is that we're building a universe. And so it's going to, by existing on many platforms, the industry, it'll take a long time to get a movie made. So one of the things that Web3 has taught me is that you have to be in constant development with other things. And again, I'm not doing this on my own. I'm the showrunner of MV3, but I'm going to be working with all different kinds of creatives. I'm not going to be trying to write the comic books, right? Like I'm going to onboard really great comic book writers to do all of these different things. And so part of it is, I don't know, where I think it's important to hit all mediums, because you just hit more audiences. Will it always begin with the Metaverse experience? 100%. Like, again, my brother and our developers are building quite an impressive gaming mechanism that will involve the Web3 world. And I want there to be something for everybody. So as long as
I know your influences are, you've explicitly stated that the Star Wars universe was a big inspiration. So much of that has been built out by people who are not George Lucas, for better or for worse. Yeah. And now to be honest, it's a bit of a mess right now, because you have these kind of conflicting timelines and different story worlds. But maybe it's starting to come back to some source of truth. But is that kind of, is it being arrogant to suggest that you can build a story world as vast and as expansive and open to interpretation as that? Or is that really what you should be going for from the get-go?
I'm not George Lucas by any, I mean, he's, I never in a million years would try and compare myself to him or his work, because he's a master, a true master. But I don't know, again, like everything we're doing is experimental right now. I think doing it this way is an experiment. And so maybe it doesn't work. I've told everybody, I can't tell the future, but I think the potential of it is really exciting to say from the beginning. The thing is, I'm always going to be there to curate the story, and the way I'm like, there's chapters that only I'm going to write, like sort of the backbone and the core is always going to be taken care of by me. In the way that, like, when you run a writer's room, you have other writers. I have 2 writers who are writing episodes of my show right now, and I trust them so much. And also, like, once I get that material, I'm going to put my touch and fine tune it and massage it and make sure that it fits into the world of Lucia. And I think that's very similar to what it's going to be like in MV3. I'll keep my fingerprints on everything to make sure that they fit into our tone and our world. But I'm also like, maybe I think it's a good idea. I don't know. I like building alongside our audience, allowing them to take their characters and build them out and build the weird places within a Luna City. It's going to be different than Star Wars, of course, mostly because we're doing it from the beginning, right? Like the fans caught on to Star Wars later and different, they started, like, as you said, George Lucas never gives away his full IP, right? It's like characters or pieces or whatever. And so I think this is a really new modern way of doing it, and it fits in with NFTs and with the Web3 structure. So again, it's an experiment and we'll see, but I see it. That's the thing. I'm like, I see the 5-year plan. I see the 10-year plan, and that's what excites me about it. So I'm going to work like hell to realize these things.
Yeah. So, and I think the product itself is something that you're obviously qualified to curate properly and deliver properly, because it's what you do. It is. And it's also not something that everybody can do. And there's a lot of projects that, again, are promising a video game and they're promising a comic book and everything else. And my answer to that is, I don't care. I get that. I can get that really well from a number of other sources that's what they do. Then they're not a Web3 project, and I don't need that. But like, if that is what you do, then I'm definitely interested. But I think
speaking this.
No, go ahead.
No, you and I are speaking the same language, by the way. I feel the exact same way, which is why we've created a licensing model for MV3. I'm like, why would I try and write the video game? I've never written a video game before. Like, why would I try to create? I've never written a comic book before, but I'm like, what I do know how to do is create really good characters and create a really good world. And people are always looking for good characters in a good world. And so now, you're talking about going to a gaming studio or a comic book developer and saying, hi, this is who I am. This is my work. You're probably familiar with some of it. Here's a new thing that I'm doing. Here's a fan base that we've already grown into it, and pitching our work so that they go and make it really good, right? I'm like, this is like where I get really excited about it, because I want it to stand on its own in all different platforms. I'm, not trying to do all of it myself by any means.
No, absolutely. Well, what's a couple of questions for you? Firstly, you said something interesting about trying to return some of the value created back to stakeholders. This is hard.
It's hard. Yeah.
It's hard. So the first thing you think is, okay, we will have a DAO, and the DAO will have its own token. And then you go, no, but tokens are shit. Tokens are a bad idea, because, and if anybody's watching at home, this is why tokens are shit. The moment you have a token, it becomes a speculative tool for people to trade against what you're doing. And all the value that you create then goes into the token and not into the project itself. And that's why tokens are a bad idea, just full stop, for anything like this. But that's my read on this, which is why you 100% should not have a token.
No,
but then you're left with, so what now?
No, I fully agree with you. And that's, it was funny. Our lawyers, the first thing that they said were like, the easiest way of doing this is to create a token. And again, I'm like started as a Degen. I'm like, God, I don't want to have a token. And then you start thinking about revenue sharing in other ways, and all of a sudden you're dealing with security issues, or, exactly. So it is tricky. But it's also, here's the thing, like when you refuse to say no, you just make it happen. Like there's a couple things that I'm like, cool, I know it's hard, but we need to figure it out. Like it's the point. Like the point of this is being able to share, profit and growth with our holders. And so we just have to figure it out, right? And when you tell your lawyers over and over again, like I hear how to do it.
So here's the thing, which is where it gets really interesting. If obviously the security issue is about the Howey test. If somebody's expectation of enrichment is based on the work that they put in and not the work that they're expecting you to put in, then it fails the Howey test. So, for instance, your audience could be incentivized to go and share on Twitter. If they do it more than once, then chances are they would fail the Howey test. Now, it's not set in stone, but actually the route to this... Yeah, so the route to this is not actually necessarily as complex as we think it is. It's just the threat of the SEC looming over all this stuff is so horrifying and kind of looming like this that we go, oh my God, no. But actually, it's very, very simple. The language around the Howey test sets it all up for you, but you've got to be absolutely 100% sure that the track you put people on, in terms of the work they put in and the reason they will be rewarded for it is super clear, and they do it more than once. But once you get past that, it's actually not that difficult. I've been obsessed with this for the last
You and
6
I
months.
should talk offline, because I don't know what the Howey test is, so I understand 20% of what you're talking about, but it's
okay. So the Howey test is basically the test against which things are measured as securities or not. And one of them is to do with an expectation of enrichment through the endeavors of others. And it's one of the key things around decentralized technologies, that they fundamentally should exist in a decentralized structure where no single person is responsible for the governance of a thing. And it's very difficult to actually prove that in a decentralized context. But in fact, really, if I'm expecting to earn based on the work that I did, then I'm not expecting to earn based on the work that you did. Therefore, there's no problem. And that is really, it can be as simple as that. So these things, they feel horrible. And as long as we don't sort of descend into immediately bolting on a token that we don't need, it is possible. It is possible, but what you end up with is a huge admin task, which is not fun.
No, I know. I mean, like, no matter how you do it, I mean, even if you create a contract that does it for you automatically, it's a crazy, crazy task. And I think once you figure out a way of doing it, then people figure out a way to automate it and make it simpler. Yeah. But yeah, it's insane. I also think it's important. Again, like, it feels like the point for me. So
yes, 100%. Like there's this idea that we build an audience and then we exploit that audience, that we take that audience and we extract as much value from them as possible. And I think the little tiny switch that we want to try and make is that audience is capable of extracting their own value. I don't even know how receptive people are to that, but like that's just, if you want to unlock the value that I'm unlocking in you, then it's there. That's an option. And maybe people don't want that, but I think you're absolutely right. I think that's why bother doing this at all unless you're opening that up.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't make sense to me otherwise. Like, it's been the whole point from the beginning. And so, yeah, it's like, I guess we are sort of playing with that idea via the gamified way that my brother has been working on, because you are, it's I mean, it's all game theory, but yeah, it's interesting. Like, I keep telling people, I'm like, we're not going to figure this out tomorrow, but we will figure it out. Like, we've been very, very mindful about that. I think our mint was quite reasonable. My brother and I, we like have not made any money. I mean, I guess even with our mint, right? It's like we have invested all of our own funds into this. We didn't want to raise money. Now we're going to have to, and we have, a partner sort of on deck. But it was the whole thing for me from the beginning was, I just want to protect our audience. I just want to protect our followers. I want to protect the relationship that happens between creator and audience. And so I was quite strict. I guess that's why I'm like, I'm not a Web3 founder, because I'm like, I'll leave everything on the table to protect our holders, and more than anything, also just the content, the project. Like, these are my babies. My characters are like, mean everything to me. I'm not going to shill them. I'm not going to exploit them, nor am I going to exploit our holders, right? And so I'd rather lose financially than have them lose.
But the thing is, you said you're not going to shill them. At some point, you have to market it. You have to get the word out there. And I wonder if you think of your audience as an extended grapevine marketing network of themselves, and if they're incentivized the right way, then they'll spread the word so that you don't have to.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what has already been happening. We have grown organically and using the Metaverse platform, of course, but we haven't like done any kind of influencer marketing yet. We're like just getting to the place where we're like, oh, we're starting to meet PR firms, and I like, that is not how my brain works. Again,
and your heart sinks because you're like, oh God, are we playing this game? It should be good. It should be good enough to just live on its own, and it will find its own audience. But this is not the world we live in, unfortunately.
I know. And again, it's like, I want to find the right audience, and I think that we will. And we have really strong plans to do that. But Yeah, it's interesting. It's like very interesting I was saying this to you earlier, but as a writer in Hollywood and as a showrunner, like I'm so protected to just write, right? There's like all of these systems in place. And like, yes, I look at budgets and I make a shit ton of decisions every single day, but like the studio and the network are doing their thing with budgets and marketing and I just have to show up, right? And like they're like, just make sure you're doing the job. Where here, I'm doing all of the things. And so it's like I'm not writing, right? I'm like, in pitches with investors, I'm, on a ton of legal calls. I have looked at I've spent way too many hours at this point looking at every single PFP in our collection and making every selection personally, right? Like I'm in the Discords talking to our holders because I think that's important. I mean, I'm running a company and it's so intense. Like I was like, right, I didn't mean to build a startup. Like that is not, I just meant to write a story in a really cool way. And it's like turned into this whole other thing. And I'm just like, cool, life throws it at you. I'm going to take it on. But it does like eventually I'm going to have to take a step back from the day-to-day operations of MV3 so that I can just focus on the writing.
Yeah. And I was going to say that the role of showrunner, I don't think people really understand what that even means, who are not kind of from the business, but it's a key writer who's in control of like 10 episodes, or it could even be 20, 22, 23 episodes of a season, and needs to know everything that's going on and be the single source of truth, advocate for things, but also, you get an episode where you've run out of budget and you've just got to shoot everything in one room. Like, what are you going to do now?
Yeah, that's
it's
like
crazy.
A great Breaking Bad analogy where they ran out of money and they had to write the fly because
it's the Tuco episode where they're just like interrogating him, and it's so good.
Yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah, but that's the only reason that they made that, right? It was because they had no money. And so but I feel like I thrive under that environment. Like I'm so comfortable on the page. Like I'm like, this is like where I can do my thing. I'm like, oh, I need to, strip this many locations away. What a fun challenge. Like I like thrive on that. I know a lot of writers who get so salty when they have to cut things out of their budget.
Restrictions are good. Restrictions are good. But
are good. Yeah.
So here's the thing. You said you want to throw this over to the community. They will have the opportunity to tell their own stories. Mm-hmm. We have clearly very well thought out, well designed, three-dimensional characters here. What engine? I'm guessing it's going to be Unreal Engine, probably, or Unreal, something like that. But what are people going to be able to do with these characters if they have the chops?
Yeah, no, first and foremost, I mean, all the Unreal, again, like my brother and I are so different. And so we build very differently, which I think is good. He and our developers are actually working on an Unreal Engine experience right now. I come from a different world, right? So I'm like, what I'm going to be doing is mentoring the shit out of all of the artists who want to actually, like one of the things that happens in Web3 is you give somebody IP rights and then like they don't know what to do with it, right? And so I'm going to be hosting workshops and also having other writer friends. And also, like one of the nice things about having worked in Hollywood for a decade and building myself up to showrunner is that I have a lot of people who want to work with me. And so I'm actually going to be working with our holders to say, we're going to be running a lot of workshops about how to develop characters. And so I want to help them take their PFPs and turn them into characters and start thinking about what are the stories that you want to tell within the world. And how can I teach you how to write, or like, what are your goals and ambitions? We're already doing all of this so that people start saying like, okay, I've created this character who exists within this world of Illuna and this is what's happening to them. And all of a sudden I'm like, how, like, you were talking about how you did pitch meetings and you had to pay $20 for that. I'm like, cool, let me get producers that I know. Let me get agencies that I know. Let me get, like prominent people who can come in and now they're going to be listening to your pitches and your work and helping fine tune them. I'm like, what a great way of bringing new voices into the mix. And so that's something I'm really passionate about because I'm like, it would be so cool if the first comic book to come out of Illuna City was not based on my characters, but based on somebody else's. And so I'm really inspired and excited by that piece of it as well. And so that's something I'm going to be spearheading.
Are we pioneering a genre here, which is elevated fan fiction?
Sort of. Yeah, no, 100%. That is sort of what it is. It's like elevated fan fiction, but rather than your fan fiction just living on whatever platform. It's like, how can we find ways to actually build your fan fiction into the story? So, you know, this character that you create that maybe like I'm playing with and become obsessed with, now like we can bring this character into a different chapter. Or, you know, I'm like, this is how you begin to build a universe. I can't do it just myself. I mean, like, I get the George Lucas analogy and is it too messy, but also like, look how vast that universe is. He couldn't have done that on his own, right?
But can you, how then will you ensure quality control? Because that's always the problem when you open things up to a community, you know, it all sort of devolves to
I'm not going to
mediocrity, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to be ensuring that we make everybody's things, right? Like that's not anything that we can do. I think like ultimately everybody's going to have to go through the process of making sure that their work is good enough to exist. Like I'm going to have to go through that process, right? Like I'm going to be out there also like building alongside these people. My character is within a Luna City and in my world within a Luna City. And hopefully as a project grows and scales, we can, these ideas are not new and we're still missing the parts to make this possible in a decentralized way. What are the parts that you think we're missing? Who's Greg?
So Greg is a commenter, and I brought this up because to a degree that's sort of true, because if you have a centralized, if you have a singular writer visionary, i.e. you, then that's not decentralized. So I guess the you know, I'm looking at this particularly with Bored Apes. The Bored Apes have exploded in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways, and not all of them good, into ways that people are kind of exploiting them and using them. And it's the most built out NFT verse that we have right now, for better or for worse. But yet the level of quality is all over the place. But that is, to be fair, pretty decentralized. I don't think it's necessarily going to be so decentralized with you, but that doesn't mean that it has to be. Or maybe the part where
yeah, I'm not super concerned about that. To like, I get the point, and I also think that, you know, decentralization is so important to a point. I also, to your point earlier, how do you ensure quality, right? Like, and I think that is an important piece of it too. And so by having people build within a Luna City, we're giving people sort of benchmarks. We're saying, this is what the world looks like. These are the quote unquote rules of the world. These are things that like you can now follow. And so people who want to build along within our sandbox, we're giving them a sandbox. We're not giving them, you know, we're not sort of giving them characters and say, go out into the wild. You can do that. Bored Apes have obviously done that very well. Ours is just a little bit different. And
there's going to be a degree of self-selection here as well. That people who have a leaning or a sort of talent in writing might then kind of reach out and find someone who has a talent in 3D animation or something like that, and then they will, you know.
Yeah, and we'll create those relationships. Like we have the Plaza right now, Artists of the Luna City. We have this initiative that ran over 10 weeks, and this is why I guess I'm so confident in the idea. Within these 10 weeks, I would write prompts, and the prompts would have to do with our characters and sort of, and then our audience, and we got like thousands of submissions a week, would create based on these prompts. And they were so obsessed with these characters in the world, and the art that came out of the space was really, really wonderful. And that originally, this wasn't a place where we were planning on building, but I got so inspired by the work, and I was like, oh, people are really looking for a platform to do this, to like create their fan fiction. So yeah, we're just going along with it. And so yeah,
things always tend to blossom in a place you were not expecting,
100%.
and it's whether you can kind of pivot rapidly enough to embrace that and build it in. I think that's what Web3 is really, really good at. It's just rapid iteration. Also, I was going to ask you, like, you've probably heard the word no a lot in your career.
Yes.
What is different about Web3? Well, I know what my answer to this is, but like, I'm curious how you see it.
When we hear the word no, as you said, we can be flexible and pivot until we hear the word yes. You know, I think we can create our own yeses, which is another thing that I have been inspired about. Like, there's no gatekeepers in the same way that there are gatekeepers in Hollywood. And so, and that is what's incredibly different. I mean, I do have a bit of an idealistic viewpoint where I'm like, you know, again, we want to give IP rights to all of our holders. We want to build concurrently to them. That makes it tricky. I'm like, I don't, you know, to go to a traditional studio and say, by the way, like, yes, you own the characters, but the world of a Luna City is being built out. Like they're gonna say, and they, you know, and our legal team is also working on this. Like, what do you mean we don't own it? What does this mean for merchandising rights? You know, what does it mean if other people? So all of it is incredibly tricky, and I think it's really easy to be cynical about it. But again, like I see it, and I think what makes us different is that our story is strong and that I know what I'm doing here. And I think there's a lot of trust in my ability to be the person who's leading the charge.
Yeah, I have the I mean I'm doing the same thing as you at the moment. I'm raising money, I'm doing pitches, and what I consistently tell people is we don't know the answer.
Yeah.
We don't have a roadmap that extends a long way into the distance, because how can we? We're not selling you a product, we're selling you a process. And if you're comfortable with that process and the people who are in charge of that process, then let's have that conversation. But if you're not comfortable with the process, then no. And I think that's a really strong analogy for the writing process, because you kind of have to trust it. Otherwise, nothing will happen. You've got to sit there and argue over stuff and figure things out and then sense check everything. And once you do that, you got to go, yes, but of course, he's a girl.
Exactly.
Obviously.
Yeah, no, exactly. You get to that place, and I always feel that in my own scripts, like things aren't working until they click in. And I'm like, there you are. Now I found you, you know, like sometimes feels like it's more about like uncovering than it is about writing it. It's like you're pulling everything away. And then you
but trusting that if you do the work, the path will reveal itself. That is just the most horrifying, awful thing, because I think we live in a culture of, here's a filter, here's a template, I just buy it off the shelf and I'm a god. And writing doesn't work like that.
No, it really doesn't.
It can't.
And so, like in a way, I do feel like I've been really primed for Web3, which is, you know, like it's like incredibly cynical. People have been burned so often, and like I'm like, I get it. I think, you know, it's very easy to be like, oh, here's another storytelling project. And again, I have that thing where I'm like, well, we're figuring this out. And I do feel like I have quite a very clear and strong vision for it. And I know that I'm not going anywhere because it's become a very real passion of mine. So I trust that we're going to figure it out. And I'm like, I don't know where we're going to land, but I think we're going to land somewhere. And I think the journey is going to be really fun.
Yeah. I find it so strange that if you believe in the power of his storytelling paradigm in Web3, why wouldn't you want to be aligned with the people who have a track record in storytelling? It makes no sense to me that people would be like, oh, but you come from Hollywood. Why aren't you like a pixelated weird thing that makes no sense? That's what I want.
I know. I think it's like in Web3 right now, right? Storytelling is equated to marketing. It means the same thing in Web3. People are like, it
really does.
What a great story. And I'm like, it's really great marketing. Like they have, and that is his own crazy talent. And that's wonderful. I also believe that underneath marketing, you have to have a product. And so we're working a little bit differently. Like I'm not a great marketer. That is not what I'm trained to do. That's like, you know, I write characters, worlds, and stories. And so we have a very different approach.
I always say that like story is designed to elicit an emotional reaction, that there should be, you know, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, but like if you enter a scene and your emotions are one thing, something has to have changed by the end. And if that's if that doesn't happen, then it's not a story for me.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think MV3 is a deeply emotional, like it's a very, very personal story, even though it's like this big dystopian future set world. It's also an extremely personal one to me. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm very confident on our long-term future. Just, I guess, because I'm confident in my ability and like my way of writing things. I'm like, oh, I know what to do once I hit the page. I know how to tell the story. We're figuring out all of the other pieces, and I very much trust my partners who understand the technology and who understand Web3 and who are running with this thing and have like taken it and made it their own. So I don't know. I'm like, I believe in what we're doing, and we'll see, right?
And you have the track record to prove it. Listen, during the course of this, we started off in the full glare of the LA dawn sunshine, and what's happened is we've gently drifted into a almost perfect film noir setup. There's a little bar of light, and then the Venetian blinds behind you. I don't know how you manage that, but that's just delightful.
These are my Minnie Moskowitz poster, the piano teacher. You can see some of my geeky references I've got here. Do you know where this is from?
I can't see it clearly enough, and I don't want to make a fool of myself.
Anyway, it's from The Shining.
Damn! Damn!
Yeah.
Well, we could geek out on Kubrick for the rest of the next hour, but let's not do that. Listen, Jessie, this was an awesome chat. I hope we didn't bore everyone with too much about the geeky world of storytelling and my failure to break into Hollywood, but your undoubted success in doing so. But listen, I'm really excited to see where you go with this. Also, we want the characters. We're building a motion capture volume here, and we'll be like, we're right there ready to start building stuff and be part of your story as well in the near future.
That awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that was Jessie Dickson-Lopez. Go check out MV3. It's mv3.io. The revolution begins. You can become the story, and I very sincerely hope that you do, because this is one that has all the feels for me. Thanks, Jessie.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care.